Chris, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, Steve, great to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, well, very happy to have you here. And you have been working with some of my coaching clients, and they've been having some great results with their marketing. And so I thought I need to get Chris on the show because whatever you're doing there, it's really working out well. So we're going to be talking all about marketing today. So where I'd like to start is I just want to learn a little bit more about who Chris Ross is. Tell me a little bit about uh, how you got to where you are here in marketing and how you ended up founding 8 Digit Media.
Yeah, great question. Kind of an interesting story, to say the least. As as a marketing agency owner, I'm probably one of the few. Well, I won't say one of the few, but one of the few individuals maybe who doesn't have a marketing degree or anything. I'm really a self-taught individual. I've always kind of been that way my whole life. Whereas if I wanted to learn something new, I just really just kind of set my mind to it and just go out and start looking for the information. And then most importantly, start implementing, right? A lot of information is really useful, or I'll say useless, I should say, if you don't actually take the information and put it into action. So that's kind of really how I got started in marketing. And with this agency in particular, it was all a result of a conversation I had with a cousin of mine who at the time had started a similar agency, but was working in a completely different niche. And he pitched me on the whole idea of like, hey, you should start this agency. Again, I didn't know anything about marketing at the time when he told me about this. And I just went online, started reading blogs, understanding different things about SEO and marketing. He kind of gave me some access to some courses that he had, and I just dove in and just started reading and learning and implementing all the stuff that I was reading. And that basically, got me to the point to where I am, right now. So I'm more of a take action type of person.
Mhm. So then how did you actually zero in on the financial services niche as the one that you wanted to target?
Yeah, great question. I get that one a lot. It is kind of interesting how I ended up in this particular niche. So when I started the agency, I started in late 2015, we'll just say 2016. And my original idea was to work with pest control operators, right? Because, going back to the story of my cousin, he was working with home inspectors. So he was like, hey, you want to get into the home services niche because, people are always buying homes. There are always going to be a need for plumbers, electricians, HVAC, et cetera. Like this industry is never going to go away, right? So in theory, sounds like a good place to get into. So I was thinking, well, let me go, look to see who else is out here. And I kind of settled on pest control operators. No really rhyme or reason. It was just, oh, here's an idea. Let me go run with it, right? Didn't do a whole lot of research behind it. And so I got started with those guys, was doing SEO and Google pay per click and different things like that. But about a year and a half into it, I really found out that was not a really good niche to be into. So I had to make a pivot, and I started thinking about, okay, who are the people out there, who tend to make a lot of money? Because if they make a lot of money, then they're probably paying a pretty decent amount of money for marketing. Is kind of what my initial thought was. And so I started, kind of, thinking around like, okay, who can I talk to? And I spoke to the guy who sold me my life insurance actually. And I was asking him, where do you find your clients at? And because he seemed to be doing pretty well, from the outside looking in. And I was like, this guy looks like he does a pretty good amount of business. So he told me he got a lot of his clients from referrals, and the light bulb went off. And I was like, okay, so if you don't get any referrals, then you are likely not going to generate any new business. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, well, that started the process for me to actually kind of doing some actual research this time around and not just taking the idea and just necessarily running with it. So I got on LinkedIn and just kind of anonymously, reached out to some people I didn't even know, different advisors, and just start asking them about their pain points. What did they like about their marketing? What they didn't like about their marketing? about how much money were they spending on their marketing, different things like that. So I was able to kind of hone in on this particular niche just by finding out some of the problems that a lot of the financial advisors had. And some of the biggest problems was it was expensive. People were spending 20, $30,000 on mail pieces, and the response rates were really, really low. So I'm like, if you're willing to drop 20 grand on a mail piece, you could pay a whole lot less for social media and get just as many people to show up to your event as it was for mail. And I did a little bit of testing with the financial advisor, and my suspicions were correct, and that kind of led me to this particular niche that I'm in right now.
Well, I'm going to make a blanket statement, and that is that generally speaking, financial advisors are not known to be great marketers because let's face it, they didn't get into the business because they wanted to be marketers. They got into the business because they love financials, they love planning, they love working with people, and they love helping people. And so as you started working with financial advisors, can you give me a sense for what did their marketing look like before they came to you? Were there some commonalities in terms of what they were doing? Was it just a lot of referral marketing? What are some of the things that they were doing, and what might you say was working well, and maybe what wasn't working all that well by the time they got to you?
Yeah. So the common theme that I would have a lot with a lot of advisors was, um, obviously back then, not by say back then to make it seem like it's such a long time ago, but pre-COVID, COVID makes it seem like it's been like we've been in this thing for 5 years now. But back in 2018 or so, 17, 18, 19, a lot of the marketing that clients that we have right now that we're doing, it was mainly centered around mail, right? Because a lot of people were doing in-person events. So whether those were dinner seminars, whether or not those are, whether they were educational events or whatever the case may be, that was kind of the typical marketing that nearly every advisor that I spoke to was doing. Very few people at the time were, really kind of, into the whole digital marketing. The ones that were doing digital marketing, right, they were generally doing it via a third party, so they were contracting with someone else to help do the actual marketing for them. And again, it was quite expensive. Um, a lot of the clients, as you mentioned, they're not marketers. They don't want to do it themselves. So they were fine with paying someone for the marketing, but they, really ultimately just want to get better results. And obviously, everybody wants to save money. So if you can get them better results at a much cheaper price, then that's generally, something that people are going to be interested in. But you're definitely right about the whole marketing piece. A lot of the guys that we work with and women, I'll say, they don't want to be marketers. They, don't want to be sitting down in front of a computer and, clicking buttons and building out stuff like that. So they're really relying upon someone else to kind of be the experts and, guide them through what they should be doing in order to, get in front of their ideal clients.
And I've been a huge fan of digital marketing and particularly like webinars. I did my first webinar more than 20 years ago. And of course, it became super popular here as a result of COVID. And I think maybe you did a little bit of a pivot once COVID hit to really help financial advisors do digital marketing and set up webinars. So let's talk about the process that you have in place. And here a second ago, you were just talking about the ideal client. So in terms of how your system works, I think one of the things you start off with is identifying your ideal client. So can you describe how you work with an advisor to help them really clarify who their ideal client is?
Yes. So this generally comes down to a conversation that I would typically, typically have with the advisor to really understand, who it is that they would like to get in front of, right? So whether it was a webinar or a seminar, whatever the case may be. Now, for a lot of people, some advisors are in a niche, right? So you have some people who want to work with doctors, nurses, educators, etc. The vast majority of people don't have a niche. So the common answer is, anybody who is a pre-retiree, 55 and up, and they have some money, right? Just kind of the blanket statement that a lot of advisors would tell you. So they don't really have a ideal client, so to speak of. And that's fine, right? So one of the advantages of social media is that you can kind of cast a wide net and kind of get everybody into your funnel, and you don't have to be super duper specific. But where I can say you can see some really really great results is really understanding your typical client or your ideal client, what their fears are, the things that they want, the things that they ultimately don't want, and then being able to use that information to develop a marketing message that's going to actually speak to them. So, for example, a recent conversation that I had with an advisor, after we were running some campaigns for her, we had a conversation around who her typical client was, and a typical client, you would generally have a couple $1 million. They were, they didn't see themselves as being rich or wealthy or anything. She said they were very much kind of, your everyday average kind of person. And we started talking about, some of the questions or feelings or emotions that would come up in the meetings that she would have with them. And as a result of, kind of asking her those specific questions, we start to understand, what these individuals were ultimately looking for, the different things that they were feeling. And we were able to put that into a campaign. So we were able to write ad copy that was centered around some of the questions and emotions and such that they had. And it worked like gangbusters, right? It was like a night and day from the original ad copy that we wrote, as compared to the new stuff that we were able to come up with after having this conversation with her. So just really understanding, even if you're just going to say, hey, 55 and up and they have money, everybody still kind of has some different feelings and emotions around what it is that they want to do. If you can understand what those things are and you can write creative copy to go along with that, it's going to help pull those people out that you're looking for at the end of the day.
Yeah, and one of the things that I often work on with my coaching clients is really trying to help them identify who that ideal client is and help them get a little bit more specific. Because, like you say, if someone says, well, my ideal client is a pre-retiree or a retiree who has money, I mean, that's really broad, as you're just describing there. And so I found that the narrower that you can go, the greater ability you have to specifically target them with a message that's going to hit them at exactly the right time when they've got some money in motion, let's say, and they need to work with a financial advisor. So, have you found that? I mean, do you sort of counsel your clients to, if they're very generic, do you work with them to say, hey, let's maybe get a little more specific, or and or really help them hone in on, well, what's the emotional connection that we can make with them that's going to make them raise their hand or click that button to say, I want to register for this event?
It's actually a little bit of both, right? So, for a lot of times, this will kind of come down, again, obviously to the advisor and, kind of how they've run their practice for the last, 10, 15, 20 years. If for the last 20 years, they've only worked with people who were 55 and up, I'm likely not going to convince them to all of a sudden say you need to niche down and, only go after this certain subset of the actual market. And if the advisor is in an area where we can develop a pretty large audience for them on social media, a lot of times that's totally fine, and you don't really need to do anything special, right? So if you're like, hey, 55 and up, like I'm here located here in Dallas, there's a ton of people that are always moving here. Like that's an easy segment to target, and we can get enough people to sign up for a webinar or sign up for a seminar, no questions asked. Where this really comes into play is when advisors are really wanting to kind of go after more higher net worth individuals, because I believe those individuals kind of see themselves, a bit different from, just your average, person who, goes to work. They have, 250, $500,000 or whatever the case may be. If you have a couple of $1 million saved, or, multiple $1 million saved for that matter, your problems are generally a bit different, than what the average individual is. And this is where um, we would try to focus on, learning more about who this ideal client is, and, kind of building that client profile to create those messages that's going to actually get them to raise their hand. Because when you start to be more specific about who it is that you're talking to, it's going to do two things, right? It's going to attract the people that you ultimately want to attract, because the message is going to resonate with them so much more. But for those other people, right, it's going to repel those people. And there's nothing wrong with repelling anyone, right? You can't please everybody. So you actually want to dissuade, the individuals that don't fit your ideal client profile from responding to your marketing message, because ultimately those aren't the people that you want to work with. And there's you know a great way to go about doing this. You're not saying anything mean, in the ad copy or anything. It's just all about how you actually create these messages, and how you're able to uh, uh, display this content, throughout your marketing funnel, so that it does actually attract the right people.
Yeah, that's such a great point that the best marketing is also a repellent in that it's repelling the people that you really don't want to work with while it's attracting the people that you do. So that's a bit of a tricky line maybe to walk, but I think that's important. Another thing that I think about here too, in terms of whether we want to have a broad-based message or whether we want to really niche down, is I'll ask advisors like, how big do you want your practice to be? So if you're maybe a solo advisor or maybe an advisor plus an associate advisor, maybe you're only looking for 10 or 12, 15 new clients per year. If that's the case, then you can be very niche. You can go very deep and narrow with a specific audience, and using the kind of marketing that you put together here, Chris, you can create very compelling campaigns that are going to attract that specific group of people that you love to work with. They take your advice, they get great results. Now, on the other hand, if you're trying to build a multi-billion-dollar RIA firm, well, then you're probably going to attract a much broader audience because you're trying to appeal to a whole lot of people. You might want to be bringing on hundreds, if not thousands, of clients per year. So then your marketing might be a little bit different. So I think that's another cut for advisors to think about is how big do you want to be? If you're fine bringing in 10, 15 new clients a year, you should have no trouble being very niche and working just with the people that you want to work with. Versus if you're trying to bring in hundreds or thousands per year, you're going to have to maybe cast a little broader net. So you started touching on this. So I think we've got the first point here, which is identifying your ideal client profile. And then I think your second part is really kind of creating this compelling copy that is going to attract people. So tell me a little bit about how you go about creating this compelling copy that's going to get people to click.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to, again, having conversations, with your ideal client, and understanding, their fears, the visions they have, the goals and such that they want to reach. Some of this will kind of come down to just kind of doing just some basic research online, right? So there's websites that you can go out there to kind of figure out what people are searching for. A lot of times you can, for example, there's a website called it's called Answer the Public. You can go in there, you can type in a question, and it'll kind of spit out these results that kind of show you all the different questions that are related to whatever your seed phrase that you put in there. So that'll kind of give you some ideas around, okay, what are people asking about, a particular subject or topic or whatever the case may be. Another thing that sometimes we will routinely do is, for example, we'll go on Amazon and we'll look at some of the books related to a particular topic, right? So if you're doing, a webinar on taxes and retirement, for example, obviously there's a ton of books out there about wealth management, tax avoidance, tax mitigation, whatever the case may be. A lot of times you can go to Amazon and some of these other sites and read the reviews, and the reviews are rich with information because these people don't hold back, right? So they're going to tell you all the good stuff they liked about a book. They're going to tell you all the bad stuff that that they didn't like about the book. They're going to tell you all the things that they already knew before they even read the book, right? So you start to kind of understand, okay, what do people like? What do people don't like? What do people feel that they already know? And you want to take all this information really and kind of distill it and come up with a creative way to put it into an ad so that when somebody reads it, that it's going to actually resonate. So this just all comes down to the part of the process of just creating compelling copy. And you don't have to be like a super copywriter in order to do this. I'm definitely not. There's people out there that can write way better copy than I can. I think one of the advantages it is that we have is the fact that we're just not afraid to try different things. And some of the best copy literally comes from the words from the people it is that you actually want to attract, right? Because you want to speak using the exact same language that your ideal client has. You don't want to talk over their head. You don't want to go below. You want to kind of meet them right where they are. So you want to say the exact same things that your ideal client is already thinking. This kind of comes down to what I talk about when I tell people you want to write messages to target people who are problem aware. Because if a person already knows that they have a problem, they're only simply looking for a solution. If the person is not problem aware, now you have to try to illuminate a problem and then tell them about a solution. And that's a little bit longer road to take. It's not that it doesn't work, it just takes a bit longer. But if I have a toothache, I don't need to go, I don't need to like tell the next person like, oh, hey, I'm gonna, take a look in your mouth and oh, you have this tooth. It's not hurting right now, but it might be hurting 6 months down the road. I'm probably don't really care about coming in to see the dentist. But if my tooth is hurting right now, like I'm looking for the dentist. So all you need to do is just put a solution in front of them. If these people, have a problem.
And do you have some examples of copy that has been persuasive here? So let's take retirement planning, for example. Are there, I'm going to say buzzwords, probably not the right way to describe it, but are there any examples of maybe words or phrases as it relates to either say retirement planning or maybe even tax planning that you found that you often use because it resonates with people and it's sort of this language that they're already talking about, as you mentioned here just a minute ago?
Yeah, I do. In fact, one of these is probably one of the more popular ads that we've done, for example, for Social Security. So, most people, the biggest question most people have around Social Security is, should I take it as early as possible or should I take it as late as possible? Right? Those are kind of the two scenarios. And it's a question that works all the time. And we literally just put that into the ad copy for a ad for Social Security. And we actually used it as a part of the creative. So this kind of goes to following some of the trends that are actually on social media. Obviously there's a lot of memes and stuff on social media, and some of the creatives are just plain backgrounds with some words. So we just put the question on a plain background and said, should you take Social Security at 62 or should you wait until 70? And that creative to this day has like been the best creative that we've done. It's so plain, there's nothing fancy about it. It's just a question. And it's the question that everybody already has. So you're presenting them with the question that's already on their mind. So immediately what people do is they comment on the ad for one thing. Like, so they'll say, oh, well, I took it at 62 and it was the best decision ever. Somebody else is going to say, oh, well, I waited until 68 because of whatever, blah, blah, blah. So now you have this back and forth between people. So people who are reading this, they're wondering, well, what should I do? Should I take it at 62? Should I take it at 70? So then that prompts them to want to sign up for the webinar, right? Because on the webinar, we're going to talk about, hey, should you take it at 62 or should you take it at 70? And that's just a classic example of just using stuff that people already have on their mind in your marketing to draw them in.
So similar to that for retirement planning, I would imagine maybe you're asking, do I have enough money to retire? Would that be another example for, say, retirement planning that you might use for copy?
It is. So we have one where we were actually testing a question where we were asking people is I think the question was, is $2 million enough to last for retirement, right? So it's just kind of a generic question. Most people will say, oh, if I had $2 million, right? Oh, that's more than enough money. But for somebody who already has $2 million, they're probably thinking this $2 million is not enough money, right? They're probably thinking, oh, I've saved this, but somehow I still feel like I just don't have enough money at the end of the day. And this is one of these questions that we'll use sometimes, again, that will attract the right person, because the person who has $2 million and feels like they don't have enough, they're going to be wondering, well, what is this lady or is this guy going to talk about on the webinar? Because I have $2 million. I don't feel like I have enough, so I may want to tune in. But the person who doesn't have it, and they probably feel like they never will have it, they're like, oh, who has $2 million, right? So they're not going to be as interested in it and wanting to sign up for this webinar or this seminar or whatever the case may be, because one, they don't feel like they will attain it. And two, they will feel like if they did have it, hey, it's going to be more than enough. So that would be another example that I would say that we've used that has worked well for us also.
Well, Chris, I absolutely love that question for the reasons that you just described there. In that, oftentimes advisors, they get a little concerned sometimes about like having an account minimum, or feel like maybe it might turn people away if they put some content or copy out there that says, if you have $500,000 or more, if you have a minimum of $2 million of investable assets, so on and so forth. It sounds like a little off-putting, like maybe a little snobby. But I love how you frame that question, which basically gets to the same end result, but in a much uh, uh, easier way, or in a way that isn't off-putting. When you say, is 2 million enough to retire? And you just said that if it's going to attract people who have 2 million or more, who are going to ask, oh, what's he going to say? People that don't have 2 million and will never have it probably aren't going to sign up for it. So essentially, that single question will self-select for the people who have 2 million or more. It's going to repel the people who don't have 2 million and probably won't ever get to 2 million. And do it in such a way that you don't come across as like this snooty RIA firm that only
Mm-hmm.
works with high net worth people. So I think that's a brilliant question.
Yeah, it works really well. And again, we never want to offend anyone. And there's always creative ways to do these things. And of course, it's the internet, so you're always going to have somebody who's going to say something smart or something here or there. But at the end of the day, you can't be scared, right, to really say what's on your mind at the end of the day, um, because you just can't please everyone. But you definitely want to, again, resonate with the people that you want to attract, and they'll most certainly understand, what it is that you're saying, and won't be offended, and will be drawn to, what it is that you're doing at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you bring up another good point there about essentially this idea of being bold. And I know a lot of advisors, I mean, I guess maybe, you know, people in general, we don't want to purposely offend other people. We want to be liked. Yet it seems like the best marketers are the ones who are not afraid to be bold in their messaging. And you don't want to be mean. I'm not suggesting you be mean. I'm not suggesting that you be toxic or anything like that. But being a little bit bold and having some courage to put some positions out there, to take, stands in things related to money so that people know what you stand for. I think that's important, because people do want to work with people who have a belief system and have values, because typically we're going to want to work with other people who share our values. Nothing, brilliant about that particular insight. So I think that's also helpful if you're not timid in putting out there what it is that you believe and what it is that you value as it relates to money and in working with people. So, all right. So I think now we've got the first two parts of this process of how you work with people. The first is identify your ideal client. The second is engage with them in some kind of irresistible offer. And then I think the third is actually the convert them. So how do you get them from this copy to actually clicking on something and getting them into the funnel? And then after that, I want to talk about the actual funnel process itself, the marketing funnel that you've developed.
Yeah, so the conversion process, this really is a collaboration between us and the advisor, and it's ultimately a lot more on the advisor than it is for us, right? Because we're not having the sales conversations or the discovery calls or anything like that with the client or with the potential client in order to convert them. The part that I feel that we help the advisor with a lot of times, comes down to the user experience that they have, before they get on the webinar or before they get to the event, right? Because there's definitely, a wrong way that you can go about kind of putting together, your landing pages. The experience that people have whenever they go to opt into something. Sometimes it just comes down to, for example, how you present your content, especially if you're talking about a webinar in particular. The in-person events, right? We don't get to show up to those, and we, don't get to see how the advisor actually presents. But with the webinar, right, we can look at the webinar video, we can look at the analytics and kind of see, what is happening when people get on the webinar or people are dropping off like halfway through. We can see what that looks like, and then be able to help the advisor, make changes to their presentation or go back and look at the video and say, well, hey, what did you say here at the 30-minute mark that all of a sudden cause people, to close the browser out and different things like that. So there's some nuances there, that we can help the advisor with. I would say probably the biggest thing from the conversion part is really the advisor giving us feedback on the quality of people that we are putting in front of him or her, right? Because if they give us good feedback saying, hey, Chris, we're getting a lot of people who, are great candidates or whatever, they're qualified, or if they say, hey, the last couple of events that we run, we've gotten this amount of people and, they weren't qualified or wherever the case may be, this gives us the opportunity to make changes to what it is that we are doing that's ultimately going to make it easier for them to be able to convert them whenever they do have these discovery calls or have people come into the office. So it really just comes down to us just, having a conversation, understanding the results that the advisor is getting or not getting, and then, making changes to the part that we have the most impact on. And then anything that we can see that we can give the advisor, we can help them with that. And one example that comes to mind, especially for webinars, is the fact that sometimes an advisor, may only be doing a webinar on one topic, right? So taxes is probably the number one most popular topic that a lot of people do. But because we run these webinars all over the United States for several clients, a lot of times we get to see some things that may be working somewhere else that the advisor isn't doing. So now we can let them know, like, hey, I have this other guy that's over here. They've been doing this webinar. They've been getting these kind of results. You may want to check this out, right? Is this something that you're interested in doing? And then this just opens up the door for, another type of clients that they may have not thought about, or another way to bring in, their ideal client that they may have not thought about in the past, that can help them, convert more people that way too.
So since we're talking about conversion, let's see if maybe we can get some numbers or some averages of what you've seen across all of your clients. And let's talk about webinars. So let's use this as an example. Let's say that we have 100 people that have registered for a webinar. Do you have some data in terms of if 100 people register, then out of those 100 that register, on average, X percent actually show up for the webinar? And then of those who show up for the webinar, X percent of those typically sign up for either a 15-minute pre-call with the advisor or maybe a first appointment. And then of those who actually have a first appointment, what percent of them ultimately become a client, and maybe an amount of time between that first webinar that they attended and when they actually become a client. So I know there's a lot of data points in there. Do you have any thoughts or any data that you can share in terms of what an advisor might be able to expect in terms of some of those metrics there?
I do, and that's one of the great things about webinars is they give you the opportunity to collect a lot of this data, and it's done for you through the app, so you don't have to rely upon anyone to manually do all these things. So a perfect example of this, again, to kind of go back to taxes and retirement, I keep talking about this because again, this is probably the most popular topic that a lot of advisors are doing. The average show up rate right now for a taxes and retirement webinar using completely cold traffic, so we're not emailing the advisors existing lists. We're not using, any kind of targeting or anything of this nature. This is just completely cold traffic on Facebook and Instagram. Is 40%. So if you get 100 people to register to a taxes and retirement webinar, you can expect 40 of those people to show up live on the webinar. So you're going to have 60 people who are going to be no shows. That's kind of your typical show up rate right now with the webinars that we are helping advisors with. So of those 40 people, most advisors at a bare minimum will be able to schedule at least 20% of those into consultations. So if you have 40 people live on the webinar, you should be able to get at least 8 consultations out of that. Like that should be your bare minimum. Now we have people who do way more than that. We have some people who book 40, 50%, of the attendees into consultations. They do a really great job at what it is that they're doing. But 20% should kind of be your bare minimum. Now the next step from there is a metric that I don't track, or I don't have the ability to track, right? Because I don't know how many consultations actually turn into clients unless they come back and give me this information. And most people don't specifically detail that information out to me. So I don't have hard numbers on that, but I can say that, anecdotally, just kind of speaking and getting, feedback from advisors, most people are going to be able to close at least 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5, people that they talk to, especially if they're qualified, right? At the end of the day. So, every webinar that you do, you should be able to at least get 1 new client out of it. And then the typical timeline that we're seeing for a lot of the webinars from a sales process perspective, and this will vary greatly from advisor to advisor because the sales process virtually is longer than what you can expect if you were doing in-person events. Most people right now, I believe, are probably somewhere around the 45 to 60 day mark, from the time that they are introduced to someone until the time that they actually become a client. So it's definitely longer. A lot of people, have given us that feedback and, have said that, hey, if they come to a webinar, it can take up to 60 days in order to close some of these individuals. Now, again, some people have a much shorter time frame. I believe this kind of comes down to these individuals, really having a well-defined virtual sales process, and they can probably do it in, maybe 30 days or later. But I think 45 to 60 days is about what most people have reported. And this is another reason why you want to at least, dedicate at least 3 months to this whole process before you kind of, give up on it. If this is something that you're interested in, it's because it's going to take a little bit of time in order for you to start to see those results, to really know what the marketing is going to do for you.
Well, thanks for sharing that because there's just a lot of great data that you just shared there. And just a couple of observations here. One is that if we start with 100 people, 100 leads, and you said this is a cold list. And so someone listening to this might say, oh, well, if I have 100, but only 40 of them actually show up for my webinar, what about the other 60? Well, the other 60 are not lost because now you put those into your drip marketing campaign. Maybe you've got a regular email list and you send out an email once a month or every couple weeks or so. Now you're starting to drip on them. So just because they didn't show up for the webinar doesn't mean that A, they're not interested, or B, that they will never be interested. It may just mean now's not the right time. So you can continue to drip on that. So part of the fee that people end up paying to you and your firm is you're getting these leads at the very top of the funnel. Not everyone's going to be ready, but someone who signs up in January, they may become a client in December because the timing wasn't just right. They're doing a little bit of preparation. So I think that's a key thing to keep in mind in here. And also, you mentioned that it could be roughly maybe 45 to 60 days between when someone actually attends a webinar and when they become a client. To me, that's super fast. And um, and I know, one of the guys that you and I know here, one of my clients that works with you, started in January of 2020 and was seeing results very quickly and absolutely crushed it. I'm sorry, in 2021. He started in January of 2021 and started seeing results very quickly. And over the course of 2021, just absolutely crushed it in terms of the number of new clients that he brought on and the amount of assets that came along with that. So, like I said, I'm a huge fan of the work that you're doing and just seminar marketing in general and just the whole process. So let's kind of keep moving along this process here. So let's talk about the funnel process. And I know I'm pulling this off of your website, but you talk about what the modern marketing funnel looks like, and you've got several steps here. So the first is you've got awareness. Number two is consideration. Number three is conversion. Number four is loyalty. And number five is advocacy. So why don't you walk me through each of those steps there and just tell me what they are and what your role is at 8 Digit Media in that, and then maybe what the advisor's role is in that.
Yeah, so I would say really the steps that we have, the most involvement in, right, is definitely going to be at the top of the funnel, right? So, the awareness, the consideration part is going to be, a big piece of what it is that we're going to do, because we're the ones that's helping the advisor put together the campaigns, setting up the ads and kind of, creating the actual marketing message there. So a lot of times these funnels, they're not very complicated, from I'll say from a technical standpoint, and just from I'll probably say a user experience, standpoint. A lot of the funnels that we set up are really only kind of two-step funnels that we're doing. So for a webinar, someone sees an ad, they click on it, they get to a landing page, they sign up, they get to a confirmation page, and then there's all the confirmation, emails and text message and reminders and such that actually go out to them in order for them to actually get to the webinar to actually hear the presentation. So it's not very complicated at all. You really want to make this thing about as simple, as you possibly can. I think when I first got started, we were really trying to build out these super duper, complicated funnels with all this logic behind. If they did this, then send them down this path. They do this other thing, you can go do that. And there's a time and place for a lot of that, and there's nothing wrong with that either. If you are someone who has aspirations to build $1 billion RA, right? A lot of that stuff you will end up doing because there's a lot of rich data in there that you can use. But for most people, that we talk to, whether they're a solo advisor or maybe they have a small team of individuals, right? They're really just focused on, hey, how quickly can we get somebody or get in front of someone, present our information, and get them to schedule an appointment to come into office or see us on Zoom. And for that, you want to keep it as simple as possible. Again, this just goes back to what I was talking about, where focusing on people who are problem aware. Because if these people have a problem, you're really only just having to present a solution to them. So that kind of takes a big part of that funnel away with the awareness, the consideration, because they're already aware, they're already considering, what it is that they should what they should be doing. It's just a matter of you presenting good information to them that's going to allow them to, make a good decision on the next steps that they should take.
Okay, so then let's talk about the software that's used here. So obviously we've got things like MailChimp, we've got ConvertKit, we've got a variety of different email clients. And then also we've got Zoom, for example, for people that want to do webinars. Do you make recommendations? Do you have preferred systems that you use? What are you finding that your clients, your advisors are actually using when it comes to the technology to do these webinars and this marketing?
Yes, so we do have some preferred tools that we like to use. In fact, as a part of our service, we provide everything to the advisor that they're going to need in order to, run the whole entire funnel. So whether that's webinars or seminars, so they don't need to purchase, any new apps or anything. Like we're gonna provide it to them as a part of our service, and the main apps that we use to build out all of our funnels are WordPress. So we use WordPress to build all of our landing pages. And the main reason why we use this is because it's more economical. There are a bunch of landing page builders out there, but a lot of them require you to have to pay a monthly fee in order to use them. Most people already have a WordPress site, or they have some type of content management system. So it's a very easy thing for us to just set up a subdomain, use WordPress to build the landing pages, and it doesn't cost them anything extra in order to do that. Beyond that, we use Activecampaign to run all of our automations. So Activecampaign is a very low cost email marketing app that you can use. It will allow you to do all of that advanced logic, if then logic, if you really want to kind of get into the weeds and segment a lot of people. That app works really well right out of the box. We use that to drive all of our automations as far as emails and text messages are concerned. We use Twilio for a lot of SMS because it's a very cheap alternative for SMS. Mark, you'll find that a lot of people will respond to SMS a lot quicker than what it would be for email, right? Because a lot of times your email is going to go to spam. So most times people won't see it, but if you text someone, 90% plus people will open a text message. So we use a lot of text messaging as far as confirmations and reminders and such are concerned. And then for webinars, we use a webinar app called Demio. So it's Demio, not to be confused with Vimeo, which is Vimeo. So they're like two separate companies, but we use Demio.com for webinars. And the main reason why we use this over any other app, because obviously, people can use Zoom for webinars and such. It has two distinct advantages for us that we like. One is the ability for you to, to have these featured actions that can happen within the webinar itself, right? So obviously, if you're on a webinar, you want to get people to go to your online calendar to book a consultation with you, and you want to make this a prominent action to get people to click on it. So with Demio, you can set up an action within the app so that when you want to share your call to action link, you just click a little button and a little pop-up shows up on the screen, and people can click on that, and it takes them directly to your calendar, as opposed to maybe using Zoom or GoToWebinar, where you may have to put your link in a chat, and then now people have to find the chat. If people have been talking in there, now they got to scroll through the chat and try to find it. It just makes it a bit more difficult for people to get on your calendar. You want to make that the easiest thing that people do for the whole entire webinar. So, different things like that. As far as handouts and polls, they have those features included within the app that works really well. The other reason that we use this is because, you can do automated webinars. And this has been something that a lot of our advisors are looking to do. And in fact, the advisor you spoke about previously, he uses a lot of automated webinars right now. So one, this saves you a lot of time. You record one good webinar, you knock it out of the park. You don't need to spend an hour doing the webinar, however often it is that you're going to do it. So the whole process is just automated, and you just wait for your webinar to happen, and you check your email and you got appointments booked on your calendar. So you don't need to spend that time talking, going over the same content over and over and over again. So this, just allows you to save some time, and I believe honestly allows you to optimize your process, right? Because if you're playing the exact same webinar every time, like, you should be able to get fairly consistent results out of it, because you're not feeling bad one day, or something weird, that may or may not happen, right? You don't have to deal with, the power going out or the audio being bad or the lighting being off or something like that. It just runs on its own. So takes a lot of variables out of the way, and I believe allows you to have a bit more consistency with the results that you can get.
Well, this is great. So let's keep getting even more granular. So you mentioned that you're using WordPress for the landing pages. So
Mhm.
you're out doing your advertising. So you're going to be doing Facebook ads or Google Words or AdWords, whatever they call it. So you're out, you're creating those campaigns, you're managing those campaigns. Someone clicks on one of those ads or they click on something in Facebook, it takes them to the WordPress landing page. So now your firm actually creates, I'm asking, I guess, you guys create the landing page so the advisor doesn't have to be technical about that. But they work with you to kind of come up and approve the copy. But ultimately, is it your firm that's actually creating the landing page? Is that correct?
That is correct. And we're also creating the ads, also,
Yeah.
right? So, we're responsible for writing the ad copy and managing those campaigns. But yes, we will write all of the ad copy for the landing pages. Now, because we, do these webinars and seminars all over, and we've done them, hundreds of times per month, right? We have stuff that already works. So we'll generally set up a landing page using some copy that we've tested 100 times or more, and it already produces results, and we'll show that to the advisor and they'll say, okay, yes, I like this, or no, I don't talk about these 2 or 3 things, so let's swap out these bullet points for these other bullet points over here, and then we'll make those changes. But it is a collaborative effort at the end of the day. We won't tell you, what it is that you should be doing. We'll say, hey, here's what works, here are best practices, and then you give us feedback and say, yes, I like this, or no, I don't. um, Sometimes advisors will come back with some things that I would feel that would be detrimental to the campaign, and that's kind of when I'll put my foot down and say, okay, I don't think we want to change this, because if we change this, like, I believe this is going to ultimately change the results that I said, that we will be able to get for you. And in those cases, we'll try to see if we can come to some kind of resolution or some sort. Um, but a lot of times, we can, make whatever changes it is that you would like to make, as long as we feel like we can still, get those good quality results at the end of the day.
Okay, so we've got the landing page, and then on the landing page, it's going to encourage the visitor to sign up for the webinar. They sign up for the webinar, and then you mentioned Activecampaign. So Activecampaign, I think, is going to be similar to MailChimp or ConvertKit in that it's going to send off the sequence of emails to keep the person engaged, to remind them about the webinar. So I guess, first of all, is that correct? And then is it your firm that's actually managing Activecampaign, creating the email sequence and the copy for the email sequence? Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both, right? So for webinars, we actually rely up on the emails that the webinar app sends. So for example, for Demio, because they send more transactional type of emails, those emails tend to not go to the spam as much as kind of some of the emails that may come out of a MailChimp or come out of a Activecampaign. So all of your confirmation and your reminder emails are actually sent from Demio. We do send some kind of one-off emails via an automation from Activecampaign. So there's a welcome email that we send out that kind of introduces the advisor to the person who opts in, and it has like a link to their website so they can go check that out and read more about the advisor. So we include that email that gets sent via Activecampaign, along with some follow-up emails that get sent after the webinar has ended. But we mainly use it outside of those emails. We mainly use it as an engine to send out the text messages. So not to get all in the weeds on the tech part, but because we use Twilio, so Twilio is just it's just a third party company that allows you to, you can build all kinds of sophisticated call centers and stuff with the Twilio service, but we just use their simple SMS service. But Twilio is just responsible for sending the message. We actually need to get the message over into Twilio in order for them to send it. So in Activecampaign, they have this thing that's called a webhook, essentially. So we create a webhook. The webhook captures the contact data, sends it over to Twilio via Zapier, and then Twilio sends out the text message. but you have to have some logic in there in order to tell Twilio when to send a message. So this is what we're using Activecampaign for, is to say, for example, hey, 3 days before the webinar, send this contact, through this automation at this time. That triggers a webhook. That webhook goes over through Zapier, over to Twilio. The message gets sent. So that's kind of what we're using, what we're using Activecampaign for. So you're not having to, obviously manually do all these things. You kind of program it with a bunch of date-based triggers and timers, and it just works.
And that's why people outsource it to you because that's not what an advisor wants to be spending their time doing. So, okay. So
Definitely
now
not.
we've done all that, and now it's time to go on stage here. Now it's time to perform. We're going to deliver the webinar. So the first time the advisor does this, it's going to be live, obviously. So the advisor delivers it. They're using the Demio system. It's being recorded. So, and I think you mentioned earlier that maybe throughout the webinar or toward the end of the webinar, a box is going to pop up and it'll say, it's the call to action, sign up for our 15-minute free introductory call or whatever your particular offer is going to be. So we're doing the webinar, we're recording it. Sometimes advisors, I think, will have a second person there too, and they might have the second person who's monitoring the Q&A box or the chat box, and they might be answering some questions in real time while the advisor's delivering. Do you have any best practices for advisors in actually delivering the webinar? Any thoughts on that?
I do have a few things that we've kind of learned over the last probably almost 2 years or so, that we've just been doing a whole bunch of webinars because of COVID. Really, I believe one of the things that you want to do with your presentation is, right, you want to get to the heart of why people are on there. So a lot of times, you'll get advisors want to come in, they want to, kind of talk about themselves, the firm, all the accolades, and there's like this whole 15-minute buildup of stuff before you actually get into what it is that you're wanting to talk about. And that can turn some people off, right? We all know on social media, there's people have short attention spans, different things like that. And the question that we get all the time is, well, how long should the webinar be? And I always say, well, it needs to be as long as it's needed in order for you to deliver the content in such a way to get the person to take the next step. So a lot of times people, they're like, okay, hey, I came here to learn about taxes. I want to know about taxes. So you don't want to spend a whole lot of time focused on, yourself and your firm and kind of all these different accolades, because 9 times out of 10, most people don't really care at that point, right? They're only going to care if they find out how knowledgeable you are. So you don't need to really speak about how awesome you are in the beginning. Let your content that you're going to deliver show them how awesome you are, because if you're telling them things that their current advisor isn't telling them, because most of these people already have an advisor maybe, and they're on there to kind of see, well, what is this guy going to say that my current guy isn't saying, or whatever, right? So you demonstrate your expertise through the actual content, and the sooner you can get to the problems that these people have, the more hooked that they're going to be, because they're going to want to stick around to actually hear about the solution to these things. So that's one thing. The other part really just comes down to delivering your call to actions. So one thing that we found out early on was that you want to deliver your call to actions sooner versus later, right? So let's say that you have a webinar, again, talked about taxes and retirement. You kind of broke it down into 3 different things. Maybe you talk about, RMDs. Maybe you talk about, I'm trying to think of, Roth conversions, and maybe there's a third part of the webinar that you're going to talk about. Well, if I'm someone who's concerned about RMDs, like that's the number one question that I have, and that's the first part of your presentation. When you get to the end of that section, you want to give people the opportunity to schedule a call, because that was their main talking point. You don't want to have them wait to the end to get to the call to action, right? Because if you already discussed that info, I'm going to want to book a call right then and there. One, maybe because, hey, I'm most pumped right now to take that action. or maybe I have something else going on that I may need to leave, but I can go ahead on and schedule this call now and I don't need to wait until the end. So you want to sprinkle, your call to actions throughout your actual presentation. I always recommend, people that they want to have at least three at a minimum. You generally want to have one in the beginning, to let people know that, hey, if you're on the webinar, you're likely going to have a lot of questions. We're going to give everybody the opportunity to schedule, a consultation. And what it's going to look like is this. You're going to see a little box pop up on your screen. If you click on that, go to my calendar, you can schedule, right? So you kind of do that within the first 5 minutes or so. And then you maybe do one in the middle. And then obviously you have one at the end, for people who stuck around for the whole entire thing. And that's something that we learned early on that worked really well with helping the advisor getting more calls booked. Another unique thing that I learned this from an advisor, so I can't take credit for it. I had an advisor who was doing a live webinar, and at the end of the webinar, he turned his camera off, turned his audio off, but he left the webinar running. And I thought he did it, by accident, because I was trying to email him like, hey, you left the. It was one of the very first ones that we were doing, so I was watching some of the webinars. I was like trying to email and let them know like, hey, you left the webinar running, like you need to go end it. But what I was looking at when I was kind of in the back end of the webinar, I saw the counter for the number of people who were clicking on the CTA to go schedule a call. So these people, either they got, sidetracked or whatever, or maybe they came back at the end of the webinar and they noticed that it was over, but it was the screen saying, hey, schedule your call. And people were booking calls like minutes, 5-10 minutes after the webinar was over. People were still clicking on that. And I was like, you know what? I don't know how he knew this. I have no idea, but it worked like a charm. And it's just something weird that you wouldn't think, but people came back to book more appointments just because he just left the webinar running a little bit longer.
Yeah, well, that's a new one too. I hadn't heard that before, so appreciate you sharing that. Now, what about the interactivity of the webinar? For example, a lot of these technologies have the ability to do polls. Do you see advisors taking advantage of that? So that's kind of question one is, are people using polls? And if so, what might be a best practice there? And then a second is, do you encourage advisors to prompt the attendees to ask questions throughout? And then do you see advisors answering questions throughout, or do they like give their spiel and then they save 10 minutes or 15 minutes at the end to answer all the questions that have come up? What are some of your thoughts there on doing polls and then also answering questions?
Yeah, so polls are definitely great. It's a great way to keep people engaged, right? So, people are sitting there, they're looking at you on the screen, they're seeing the slides. So anything that you can do to get them to interact with you, I believe is great to keep the engagement up and also keep their attention. So a lot of our advisors will use polls throughout the presentation. Now you don't want to overdo it. I have some people who probably have like 15 different poll questions. And to me, I think that's a whole lot because you're asking, the attendee to do a lot, throughout this presentation, with all these different polls. But, if it works for them, it works for them. It's not something that I would necessarily do. But, having 2 or 3 different poll questions in there is definitely a great way to keep the engagement up. So I definitely encourage you to do that. The same thing goes for handouts. A lot of times people will get on the webinar and they'll want to know, hey, are you going to make the slides, available to me? So, sometimes this is something that you can do as well, just so that people can go back, through the content later. And, I don't know, maybe they're going to take notes or, they'll probably have some follow-up questions with you for something like that. So those are definitely two key features that you want to try to incorporate. As far as audience participation, this really comes down to the advisor and their personality, I believe. We have some advisors that love interacting with the audience, especially if you're going to be doing this live. So they will encourage people to, to ask questions or, hey, put a 1 in the chat box if you think this or if you believe that or whatever, right? So just another way to kind of keep people engaged. I'm more of a proponent of not necessarily wanting people to ask questions in the chat, because I would much rather them schedule a phone call with me in order to get those questions asked, because now you can dig deeper into their situation to kind of really understand the problem that they have and hopefully lead them, to a solution, versus trying to give more of a, generic answer on the webinar, because you're likely going to have some kind of follow-up questions, because most people aren't going to get super specific, when they type in their question. They're not going to, probably give you all the details that you need to effectively, be able to provide a good answer. So I always tell people that it's best to encourage people to book a phone call. One, it's free, doesn't cost you anything. You can let people know, hey, I'm not going to try to sell you anything on here. You simply just want to get your question answered. We'll answer that for you. And this just gives you an opportunity to have a much more in-depth conversation that may lead to some better results for you at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's a good point there about if they do ask questions, then maybe that precludes them from wanting to set up an appointment because you're able to answer their question. Or, as you say, they don't give you enough data because they're in front of a whole bunch of other people that you're not going to be able to give them a good answer. I think another thing too, as I think about it, is if you want to record this webinar, which you're probably going to record it, and then if you want to reuse it so that you don't have to deliver the presentation live every time, if you've got a bunch of people that ask questions during that recording, then that's not going to work real well in the future if you just want to replay that recording for a future webinar. So yeah, so I think there's some pros and cons definitely to encouraging people to asking questions. I do love the poll thing. I know when I do webinars, when I host webinars, almost always I'm going to ask polls or do polls, and typically I'll have one toward the beginning and I'll have one maybe about 3/4 of the way through. And one of the reasons why I like to put a poll at the very beginning, and typically it's just one question, is in my events, usually I'm interviewing somebody or I'm facilitating a panel, but I love doing a poll at the very beginning because then me and my guest or me and my panelists will then riff on the results of the poll, but then that also helps us guide some of the conversation going forward because I really am thoughtful in the question that I ask. It's going to be obviously on point, on topic, and then that's going to help me know what's important to the participants that particular day. So it helps guide the conversation and gets people interactive. So I think it's important to just keep people awake, during the presentation. So that's all good. All right, so let's talk about the pricing. So how do you price your service to advisors?
Yeah, so this is one of the things I believe that allows us to kind of stand out from a lot of people in the market right now. We do basically all flat rate pricing. So there's a bunch of competitors out there. Everybody kind of has their own thing here, for how they want to run their business. But one of the things that I learned, through doing this kind of research, in the beginning with talking to advisors was you want to make it easy and kind of predictable for what it is that somebody's gonna, want to be able to spend on marketing. And for that reason, I came up with flat rate pricing because now the advisor knows, what they're going to pay us every month, right? It's not going to be some big surprise whether, they need to, spend 10, 20, $30,000 or whatever the case may be. They know it's just going to be a flat amount. So for our webinars, we charge a flat $2,000 a month is what we charge to deliver that service. And it allows you to do up to 4 webinars per month. The same thing goes for our seminars, so our in-person events. That service is a flat $2,500 per month, and it allows you to do up to 4 seminars per month. So you know exactly what it is that you're going to pay us, and you really get the value, I believe. Obviously for people who want to do multiple events. And this is what a lot of our clients are doing, right? Because you're going to pay us the same amount whether you do 1 webinar or you do 4. So most people are like, well, hey, let me do 4, right? Let's try to max this thing out so I can get, as much of a return on my investment as possible. And we like doing it again because we want to make it advantageous for the advisor. Mainly because we want, as with anybody, we want to keep a client as long as we possibly can. So if we can deliver consistent results for them, then they're gonna, they're gonna stick around. And over the long term, that ends up being, a good deal for us, and also a good deal for the advisor. Now, because we charge in this manner, right? You pay at cost for your marketing. So you're going to have a budget that you're going to set aside for Facebook to actually run your ads. And most people on average right now spend about $1,000 per event that they're doing. So if they're doing a webinar, most people will spend $1,000 for one particular date. Sometimes you can split that $1,000 between two dates, depending on how we structure the dates. The same thing goes for seminars. Most people will spend about that same amount to do an in-person event as well. But again, this goes back to you really knowing what it is that you're going to spend every month. So if you're going to do 4 webinars a month, and let's say that you're going to spend $1,000 for each date that you're going to do, you know that you're going to spend $4,000 on Facebook ads, and you know that you're going to pay us $2,000. So you're going to spend $6,000 every month that you want to do 4 webinars. And that allows you to, again, to kind of have that predictability, especially if the results are coming in, right? You kind of know, hey, every $6,000 that I spend, I'm going to get X amount of clients that generate this amount of revenue. And then, this allows you to kind of project out and kind of have some confidence in knowing what kind of results you're going to get.
Yeah. So basically, in terms of the pricing that we're looking at here, you said $2,000 per month for the webinars, $2,500 for the seminars, and then maybe roughly $1,000 in Facebook ads for each of the events that you do. So maybe if you're doing 2 per month plus the 2,000, we're looking at maybe 4,000 a month. If you're doing 4 per month, 4 events per month, 2,000 plus the 1,000 per ad is 4,000 is 6,000. So maybe max we're looking at $72,000 a year for this. So if you start putting pencil to paper here and figuring out, okay, well, how much new business do I have to bring in order to get a really nice ROI on a $72,000 ad spend? Well, just think about this. If you brought in, say, 14 million in assets over the course of doing 4 a month, which is 48 events per year. I mean, 14 million is a drop in the bucket if you're doing that many. So 14 million in new assets at 1% is 140,000. So I'm just kind of using some rough numbers here. So 140,000 in gross recurring revenue each year on a $72,000 ad spend. If you had a 50% cost of like your profit margin before owner comp, I mean, you've got a payback period here of 1 year on profit on break even. So year 2 and beyond, as long as you can keep those assets on the book, you're making bank here. So again, that's been my experience with my clients that are working with you, is that they're getting a really solid ROI on this business. Again, that's why I'm a huge fan of the work that you're doing there, Chris, and the team. So, I think it's great. So let me just, we'll just kind of wrap up here with 2 things. One is I want to go back to the webinars for just a second. And I do a lot of webinars. And so for those of you that want to see a replay of some of the different webinars that I've done over the past year or 2, you can go to my website, which is stevesandusky.com/events. And I've got several of them there as replays. So that's stevesandusky.com/events. And you can see some of the past events. You can see how I facilitate those, how I work the polls in there and asking of the questions and so on. So it might give you some ideas there. So that's the first thing. Second thing, Chris, is as we wrap up here, anything else that you want to share? Of course, I want you to give out your contact information so people can reach out to you. But any other comments, observations that you want to make here on our talk today?
Yeah, I'll say, if you want to learn more about us and, how we work with advisors across the country to help them grow their practice, you can visit us at 8digitmedia.com. And 8 is spelled out, EIGHT is not the number 8. So just 8digitmedia.com. There's, a lot of good information there. We're super transparent, so all of our pricing is on the website. It's not a surprise. I'm very much upfront and open about the results that you can expect to get if you decide to work with us. I'm also very much a relationship, person. I value the relationship over anything else with well, I'll say with all of the clients that we work with. Just mainly because one, you want to like the people that you're working with. If you're going to be cutting somebody a check every month, right? You don't want to do it begrudgingly. You don't want to like hate talking to somebody. Like you really want to have a really good relationship with them. And then two, we're very much results driven, right? At the end of the day, I don't kid myself about anything. People want results, right? So people, you're paying money, you want to get results, and you want to be able to get them consistently. And this was a big thing that a lot of advisors, told me whenever I was doing research is, it's a lot of up and down, or it can be a lot of up and down in this industry. And what we want to do is we want to take the unpredictability out of it and allow you to have some good consistent results. And we'll do any and everything we possibly can in our power to make sure that you get good results and you're able to get them on a consistent basis. So that's definitely something that I believe in, and is definitely a motto in my agency. Other than that, I'll probably say the number one thing that I would tell someone who's interested, in getting into digital marketing is, you just got to take that first step to get into it, right? Some people have tried it with different agencies and it didn't work. And I get it. You kind of get gun shy and you don't want to do it again, and that's totally understandable. But this is where things are going to be going. So, unless you plan on retiring here, I would probably say within the next couple of years, everything is already heading toward that way. So it's going to be digital marketing from here on out. So you're going to have to find either someone to partner with that understands this and can help you, or even if you develop your own processes and systems. Point being, you want to get started. You don't want to be lagging behind and kind of being the last one to get into the game, because you're gonna find yourself in a world of trouble. So just take action, get started, and don't give up too soon on it is the thing that I would say.
Yeah, well, this has been great, Chris. I appreciate you taking some time here to be on the show. Congratulations on all the great work that you and the team are doing here, and I wish you continued great success.
Thank you, Steve. I definitely appreciate it. Definitely enjoyed being on the show here as well, and continued success to you and all of your clients that you're helping, with growing their practice as well.
All right. Thank you, Chris.